Joining me here was a man who called Oregon's win over Michigan and Kansas's win over Purdue, and that's Kevin Harlan. How are you, Kevin?
Great, Rich. Great to be on with you.
So how loud was it? Was it a home game essentially?
It was loud.
Yeah.
There were a ton of people. Lawrence is probably 75 miles, and that might be stretching it from Kansas City. Kansas travels well anyway.
Yep.
But when you put them in Tulsa, which is a 4-hour ride down the road, and an hour east to Kansas City, it becomes pretty accessible. And they were there and in full throat, and they smell blood, and they smell perhaps a Final Four berth, which would be the first one in a while for the team. They lost last year in the Elite Eight to the eventual national champion Villanova Wildcats. So they've got experienced guards. They think they've got the team in the makings to get all the way to Arizona.
Well, it's hard to argue with that, Kevin. I mean, they clearly look the deepest. They clearly have, you could say that Josh Jackson is the best individual player in this tournament, up there with Lonzo Ball, certainly in that age group. And then then there's Frank Mason, and there's the rest of the team, and there's Bill Self. They look pretty damn stacked, and I'm sure Purdue feels that way now.
The proven method for recent national champions has been experienced, crafty guard play. And these two kids, Mason and Devontae Graham, show that for Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
You throw in a fifth-year senior in the middle, some athletic wings, some outstanding passing, and everybody is moving. That's the one thing about Kansas. They throttle it up on offense, and they move 110 miles an hour baseline to baseline. But no one is ever standing around. It's like they're not sitting there waiting for sets to develop and evolve. They are always moving, which resembles a lot of what the NBA is all about. Now, this is not a traditional Bill Self team. He would much rather have a couple of bigs straddling the block, working in and out of the lane, and having a lot of the offense go through them. But they don't have that size. But what they do have is a lot of length, a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed, and some pretty high-Q basketball players on that floor with experience, and it's paying off. So he has had to really kind of fundamentally change what he believes in to adjust to what he's got, and so far, so good.
Yeah, and then it looked like you were going to have two close games involving two Big Ten teams last night, Kevin, and then all of a sudden the pedal to the metal, and Purdue was, the number of the bus that ran over them, you couldn't even get it. Which adds to their impressiveness. How well do you think Oregon matches up with them?
Well, they've got three spectacular players. One was the Defensive Player of the Year in the Pac-12, Bell. The other one is their leading scorer, and he was the Player of the Year in the Pac-12, Brooks. And then kind of this X factor is a former high school Player of the Year in Los Angeles, is Dorsey, who has been one of the top scorers in the tournament overall through the first three games, and he is scoring and not blinking an eye on a big stage like this. And the other two kids are veterans, and they are playing with that kind of moxie. And they've got a coach who might be the most underrated coach in college basketball, a guy you never hear of, in Dana Altman. They continually recruit top 100 kids. They get them to go up there. Most of them stay. These kids have all stayed. And if they had this kid named Chris Boucher, who was a terrific shot blocker, who blew a knee in the Pac-12 tournament, I would say this game tomorrow night, this elite game in Kansas City, could be everything you'd want an elite game to be. The unknown is if those other three kids I just talked about will come on and play in the absence of Boucher. But if they had him, he could protect the rim. He would be a clogger in the middle of the lane. He would just add so much more length coupled with Bell. It'd be very, very tough to score on slashers and guys that would take it to the rack.
Kevin Harlan, who's going to call that Elite Eight matchup between Kansas and Oregon from Kansas City, joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. On the other side of the bracket, since you're not calling it, maybe you'll be able to give us the answer to our poll question today. Chris Brockman, ask it of Kevin Harlan, will you please?
Kevin, looking at the East and West region, one of those six teams will play for the national championship. Who has the best chance to win that game? Wisconsin, Florida, Baylor, South Carolina, Gonzaga, Xavier.
What do you think?
Yeah, I like Gonzaga, and I love Wisconsin. Wisconsin had that trough where they lost 4 or 5, end of the Big Ten season. They recaptured what they had. That's a veteran team, guard-oriented. Bronson Koenig has been through Final Fours, Elite Eights, as much of a leader as you're going to find in any single team in college basketball. And then they got Nigel Hayes, and then they got Ethan Happ, who's one of the best players in the Big Ten, maybe an undervalued conference overall. I think people kind of slept on Wisconsin a little bit when they saw them falter toward the end. But most teams have that bump and hit that trough, and they've come out of it, I think, stronger, more resilient, and with a real purpose. I love their compass is pointed in the right direction. I think they encompass everything you would need. You know, they can slow the game down. They can play at their pace. I think they're very well coached by Greg Gard. There's just a lot to like about Wisconsin. And then Gonzaga, and they got pushed certainly by West Virginia, but they've got, I think, so much going. And I wish they still had Sabonis, who left early, because if they had him, this would be far and away the best team in college basketball. As it turns out, he goes to the pros. He starts in the NBA for Oklahoma City. This is still a very good team, and it just seems like Mark Few is due. They're just due to make the Final Four. So those are the two teams I'm really keeping an eye on.
Speaking of Oklahoma City, Kevin, drawing on your experience calling the games for TNT and the association, I had Rick Barry on the show in hour one as he's getting ready to watch Canyon play for Florida against Wisconsin tonight. And I asked him who he thought the MVP of the NBA was, and while giving the proper hosannas to Russell Westbrook, he proffered that Russell is trying for his triple-doubles, whereas Oscar Robertson was not. Where would you stand on that? I love that theory.
I love that observation. Rick is he gets right to the point, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Well, you should have heard what he had to say about LeVar Ball, Kevin. I spared you on that one.
And that's a ticking time bomb right now.
Yes.
But anyway, the play of Westbrook is interesting. When you look at their stat sheet, what stands out the most is you see 2 points, 4 points, 6 points, 43 points, among all the starters. And there's no doubt that he's got the ball in his hand the most. But he is distributing, and he is playing both ends with the rebounding. It's just that he's just so much better than anybody else on his team that, to survive, they've got to rely on him so much. It would be great when these other players kind of pick up their game, and I think he'd be the first to tell you, I'd rather get 18 points a game. I don't like scoring 40-plus points a game, but it's kind of the way the season has evolved as they continue to try to figure out what they are in the wake of the Durant departure. So they've got a lot of things going on right now. Young players are trying to work in there, and I can appreciate the situation. Harden has been terrific. Leonard has been terrific. LeBron continues to be, the best player in the league. This is going to be a very tough one because there are many worthy candidates. I can't disagree with what Rick says. He's so astute in what he looks at. He's incredibly honest. It just seems historically that if you would not vote for Westbrook, you might be like missing something real prominent. Then a couple years down the road, we're going to look back and say, how couldn't you have voted for a guy that broke something that happened back in the early 60s in the NBA? But what Rick says is right on the money. I mean, Oscar played within the framework and the speed and the pace of the team he was playing on in Cincinnati.
And then the topic du jour in the association, Kevin, this week, we had Charles Barkley on Monday, and boy, did he put the star players in this league who are resting, taking games off on the road on full blast. And when you call these, because a lot of these games are happening when obviously TNT's in town or ABC's in town, which adds to the whole spotlight that's put on it. When you talk to the coaches who are resting some of these players, how does that process work? Is there somebody in the front office whose job it is to take the metrics of REM state and travel and figure out when these guys should sit, and the coaches are going to just stick to that plan no matter what, or the coaches deciding themselves, I need to give this guy a break tonight? What is it?
In the beginning of the season, Rich, we'll walk into these coaches' offices, and they'll have a calendar on the wall that will show every date of every game in the regular season. And they plan accordingly. It's a lot of feel, certainly, if a guy's injured, a guy's haggard, or whatever the case is. But they can look. We walked in Ty Lue's office the other night in Cleveland, and he had the month of March. And he says, all right, we've got 3 games in 4 days. We have 2 days off before. It's a road trip. We have 1 game in between at home, and then we got 2 days at the end. If I rest LeBron for a game or two at the end of that. He can have almost a week off with no practice, no work, only rehab and the things in the training room, and that's it. He said at this time of year, these guys are just beat up. To me, the obvious answer is the season is too long. And you know what else is just appalling? Not appalling. Well, it is appalling. Mm-hmm. They don't practice. The NBA does not practice. Now, I'm not talking about the guys at the end of the bench, the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th guys that are up and back from the D League, or now the G League, I guess we're going to call it. I'm talking about like the top 7 players. They don't practice. And if they've got that rare 3-day off span, they may come in, get a day and a half of good work. We hear about shoot-arounds and all the things, day of game, but they do not practice. It's the only sport, and the play suffers because of it. If you cut back the season to, say, 68 games as it was in that strike-shortened year, you've got better rested players, more practice time for better ability and skill, and a much better product overall, a much better product to watch for the fans. But if you go to the owners and say, you're going to go from 82 to 68 games, you're going to knock out 14 games, how are we going to make up that revenue? Well, figure out a way. Maybe extend the playoffs, to another couple teams. Maybe, they're making more money than they ever dreamt they could make from the networks. But the product is hurting, and the thing that's being brought up now are resting the stars. I get it, and I get what Popovich and all these other guys do to their best players, because it only matters come the playoffs. But at the same time, people are paying a lot of money. People on TV are watching. The networks are spending a ton, and when you set your top 3 players, or in Cleveland's case, with Love being out, LeBron and Kyrie, what is there to watch? Tristan Thompson? It's not as compelling. And the problem is the league has gone after the stars, and I get that because it built the notoriety of the league. And it makes total sense. It's a marketing guy's dream. But in all the other leagues, it's all about teams. In the NFL, it's about teams. So that when a star receiver's not, doesn't matter. Green Bay Packers are in town to play the Chicago Bears or whoever. The league had to find a niche, and that's what they found. They've got the biggest stars on the planet. But there's a backside to that story, and we're going through it right now. And they got a smart commissioner, and they'll figure it out. But it sure is painful now and very uncomfortable to go through these scenarios where the best don't play. You see a family of 4, and they've paid a ton of dough, and they're not going to see LeBron, or they're not going to see whoever they had paid to see. And that's too bad.
Kevin, you're the man. Enjoy calling the Elite Eight with say hi to Reggie for us. And Dana, too. Boy, why do they have to make Dana Jacobson interview Beeline after
Dana
that? Come
Allman.
on. No, Beeline. She interviewed Beeline.
Beeline, yeah.
Come on. It was Michigan on Michigan. Everybody just needed a group hug right there.
I know.
Afterwards.
Very obvious, very transparent.
I know, but she's a pro.
We all shaking our heads.
Take care, Kevin.
Thank you, Rich.
You got it. Kevin Harlan.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.